Okay, we're ready to go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Community Library. My name is Jenny Emery Davidson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Community Library. And whether you are here with us in the John A. and Carol O. Moran Lecture Hall, or you are joining from afar via live stream, we're so glad to be connecting with you over this wonderful program about music. We here at the Community Library feel a particular affinity for our collaborations with the Sun Valley Music Festival, as we are two privately funded, publicly minded organizations, nonprofit organizations that are dedicated to providing opportunities for everyone for free to connect with beautiful cultural activities. So we love these collaborations. While you are here at the library, I encourage you to perhaps browse the 811s in the stack. So that's going to be right outside the door here. The 811s, that is the poetry section. And you might encounter something like this, a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye, which you could take with you, perhaps pre or post symphony reading. In this particular poem, she is describing a musical performance in which the performer is on one side of a national boundary and the audience is on the other side of the national boundary. And she concludes with these lines: "Remind us again, brave friend, what countries may we sing into? What lines? What lines should we all be crossing? What songs travel toward us from far away to deepen our days?" And as I am so, like you, eagerly anticipating tomorrow night's program on Latin American dances and contact, I've been thinking a lot about how music, how literature can take us across boundaries. And to ask that question, what songs travel toward us from far away to deepen our days? I expect that this morning's program will take us a little ways in answering that question. And with that, I'm very happy to turn it over to the Executive Director of the Sun Valley Music Festival, Derek Dean.
Thank you, Jenny, and good morning, everybody here in the room and online. We're very pleased this morning to be able to offer Alasdair Neal, our music director, in conversation with two of America's foremost composers, Kevin Putz and Gabriela Lena Frank. Kevin Putz wrote Contact for Time for Three and Orchestra, which will perform tomorrow evening. The Sun Valley Music Festival was one of a small group of orchestras that formed a consortium to commission this work, but there's an even tighter connection because I think it was a hike on Baldy that Alasdair Neal had with Nick Kendall from Time for Three, where they first conceived the idea of a collaboration between Time for Three and Kevin Putz. And Putz is known to many of us for the composition Hymn to the Sun, also commissioned by the Sun Valley Summer Symphony at that time, that was performed on the Pavilion on the opening night concert in August of 2008. Putz has written works for all kinds of different ensembles and is perhaps most famously known for his opera Silent Night, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 2012. It recapped the famous evening in World War I where the combatants spontaneously ceased their conflict on Christmas Eve. Gabriela Lana Frank joins us. She is currently composer in residence at the Philadelphia Orchestra, and she won in 2020 the Heinz Award, which she was presented for her activism on behalf of emerging composers of all aesthetics and demographics. Frank's works often touch on themes of identity, reflecting her own personal experience and heritage, as well as her deep study of different Latin American cultures. She was awarded a Latin American Grammy Award for her composition Inca Dances, and she was also nominated for an American Grammy for a piece called Hilos, which was a work for an interesting chamber ensemble of clarinet, violin, cello, and piano, wherein she not only wrote the work, she played the piano. She is also the founder of the Gabriela Lena Frank Creative Academy of Music, which serves as a sort of laboratory for emerging composers to engage in experimentation and discovery. Ms. Frank had hoped and planned to join us in person, but family matters compelled her to stay home in California, but we're delighted that she offered to participate via Zoom. So please now welcome Alasdair Neil, Kevin Putz, and Gabriella Lena Frank. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and good morning to you, Gabriella. I can see you on my screen here, but we can't quite see you. Can we hear you, first of all?
Hold on. Good. Now we can.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Okay,
can't.
there you are. Okay.
I can see her, but can't hear her.
Good morning to you. I hope you're well. Can you? How are we doing now? You can hear me. Would you? Can you say something so that we can hear you?
No.
All right.
Is there
So I'll tell you what. We'll start the discussion here while our folks are trying to fix the problems. And we'll see how this goes. Kevin, let me throw you the first question. What I would love to do is I'm so delighted that we have these two incredibly significant American voices from the same generation. Not just the same generation, but I love the internet. You are exactly the same age, as it turns out, born in the same year. And so, as I said, some of the most distinguished living composers to have you both with us and to be presenting both of your music tomorrow night is a real honor for us. I think when I talked about what it is to be a conductor, and I've done this a number of occasions, everybody has a basic idea of what's involved. But I'm not sure people necessarily know what it is like to be a composer and to set about a process of composition. I know this is an impossibly generalized question, but talk us a little bit through your, we'll start with Kevin for obvious reasons, your creative process when you're faced with the equivalent in sonic terms of an artist's blank canvas.
Well, I'm also back here at this great festival and looking forward to rehearsal today, rehearsal tomorrow, concert with these amazing musicians. And okay, so we're going to get into the piece later, but that's a very hard question to answer, and Gabby might be able to do it better than I can. But I think just for me to begin requires a sort of leap of faith. You know, like if you're trying to write a story. How do you start writing a story? How do you start writing a poem? There has to be some moment where you just feel, you just you do it. Something comes, you say something. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's really great, like the first line of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, which I've been dealing with a lot with an opera I'm working on. But something begins it that you feel good enough about. And of course, in our terms, it's a sonic idea, which you find will be compelling or arresting in some way, and you might think about that, all the pieces and think about the beginnings of those pieces and what it is that led the composer to feel it was a worthy beginning. What is it about it that asks questions for the listener? That makes you want to, wait, what is that, and what does it mean, and where might it go? And so I think we have to have a sense of whether or not, I've heard it said before that composers, first and foremost, we have to recognize when we have something. That's the most important thing, and when we don't have something, recognize when this idea really isn't worth much, and when something, oh yeah, this is good. And I read an interview with John Williams when he said something about, I think he was trying to talk about this, the same thing we're trying to do right now. How do you do it? And he said something like, you can, like Beethoven knew, it was clear when Beethoven knew when he had something. Brahms knew, Saint-Saëns knew, it wasn't like a sheepish sort of thing. It was like, they knew very well that this is a good idea or not a good idea. And so I think it starts there. And then for me, and it's, I think, different for every composer, it's a matter of just reacting to that thing that you have and extending that. And then thinking, as you're thinking of the next measure and then the next phrase on a very focused scale, you're also zooming back. And you think, well, what could happen to this thing? What might happen to it? If this is going to be the nature of this movement, and this, and you know, assuming I'm going to write a multi-movement piece, what might the second part be in relation to that? And so you're already starting to think about those things. And frankly, I mean, I'm always thinking, how can I bring this material back? Is there a way that this first idea might return at the end of the entire piece, and feel very different because of the experience we've gone through, you know? So that's a start.
Is the first idea that comes into your head necessarily the first idea that comes on the page, or could it be right, like an in media res sort of thing, you know, halfway
Yeah.
through, and you work backwards or forwards?
It has happened before, but not with great results for me, actually. I need to know what the beginning is, you know? When you just sit down as an audience, the first thing you hear is the most important thing. And it was different, you know, 20 years ago. But these days, I just know that I won't be able to continue unless I'm happy with the first utterance, you know, and that being compelling in some way. I have to feel good about that to continue.
That's interesting, because I mean, that could have gone either way for me. I would have also it would have made sense to have had the other thing somehow or other. This is like, oh, this would be a great way to end a piece,
Right.
as well.
Yeah, actually, and actually with the piece Contact that you're performing here,
Right.
it was a little bit, I think we're going to get into that later, but it was a little different for the process of writing that piece.
That'll be fascinating for us to talk about. Just doing a check-in to see if Gabriella is closer to being with us.
Yes, so there is a technical difficulty that we are not going to be able to surmount in the next few minutes. So the conversation will be yours right here in this room.
All right.
And we'll follow up with Gabby separately later. So we apologize for that. It is the challenge of when you are connecting over multiple distances. So
Well, you and I can. I'm sure we could just
We can
shoot
do
the
it. We
breeze
can do it.
until at least past lunchtime. So
Yeah. If I knew Gabby better, we've met a couple times. She's an amazing person, amazing composer. I could maybe speak on her behalf, but I don't think I will. I don't know.
Well, likewise, and she and I met for the first time over the phone yesterday.
Yeah.
So this is the way it works sometimes. But all right, well, let's. You mentioned something about literary sources. A little ditty that you've just wrote recently that's getting its premiere is coming up at the Metropolitan Opera. You may have heard it in November this year, the premiere of The Hours, starring Renee Fleming, Joyce DiDonato, and Kelly O'Hara, one of the most eagerly anticipated events, I will say,
Thank you.
In recent years. Tell us, before we talk about Contact and Time for Three, let's tell us about that, because this is pretty much another magnum opus for you, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's certainly, you know, for me, it's a big deal. How do I even start? I mean, what I realized when I started, my first opera, Silent Night, was mentioned earlier by Derek. And what I really found from that opera, just from the very first bars of composing it, was how much I love storytelling and music. And really, it made me think I should really be a film composer, because that's where you really can, you know, there's a very specific thing you're trying to do with the music. And the difference with opera is that the lines are sung, you know, and that you're the director as well. It's a very interesting thing, you know. Whereas, you know, a director might tell some actors, or you know, or you know, suggest, no, you should take a little time after that line. Or what about if there was a full 30 seconds between those two lines. You walk to the window, you think about something, and then you come back and you say half the line, and then it's interrupted. And so you come in before he even finishes that line. You know, that's how directing. That's what a composer has to do, and that's what's so fascinating about it, that through music notation, you are the one who's deciding the pace of those conversations, which are sung, which is another complication. Uh, it's a very complicated medium. I'm not even sure how to start with it. It's so difficult, and there's no formula. There used to be kind of a formula, when Mozart was writing his operas.
That's
I mean,
true.
to some extent.
Arias, recitatives.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then,
Like when you want the story to move forward, you have a recit, and then when there's some emotion to be, or a situation to be, you know, sort of the time stops, and then someone sings an aria, and I mean, I guess that's kind of how it is. Though I tend to want to work in a much more seamless way, where it's moving. You're not quite sure where you are. But anyway, I wrote the hours and Contact concurrently, actually.
I think if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
one of the challenges of getting Contact into existence was your deadline with the Met and everything.
Yeah, it
Because
was
as you can
constantly.
imagine, that didn't take 3 months to write an opera, right?
No, and the Met wasn't really like laid back about. You know, you can,
Oh, do
yeah, just
tell.
just give it to us whenever you're done. Yeah, no, there. So no, it's very very much on a schedule, and of course the pandemic made things extremely challenging. And the entire time, as things just got canceled left and right, I was thinking, is this the next thing? I'm going to get a call from the Met. They're going to say, well, we had to move the stuff that's in 2021 into 2022. So someday we'd like to do a project. I was thinking all these things were in my head, and I was meanwhile trying to work really uh, enthusiastically on the piece. While of course everybody's home. My son, my 12-year-old's doing homeschooling. And my wife,
This
who
must
play.
have been terribly hard to get the concentration
Well,
you
it
needed
was
in
it
New
was
York as well.
yes, yeah, for sure,
That
yeah.
too.
I mean, I was writing it, in the mornings, sometimes before my family would wake up, and anyway, it was definitely challenging. But yeah, I think that's true. That I was going back and forth between Contact and the hours, and I've heard that people hear some similarities in the kind of language of the two pieces, the musical language. I actually don't hear that a whole lot. I think they're very different. But in many ways, the time that we had to work on Contact, and to have the original performances canceled and rescheduled 2 years later, it actually was great because Time for Three and I were able to really work on it. And we got together with masks on in various places in the city, and I would play the orchestra part on the piano, and we would just think about it. Like, well, what if we did this, and what if we did that, and I don't know if we want to get into that
Oh, I
now,
think that would be great.
but
I mean, that's a good segue into talking
yeah,
about this piece that we're going to be
sure, we can
hearing
start there.
tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, it began with Alasdair Neil because, yeah, like I didn't know it was on a hike, but
It
yeah,
was.
yeah.
Nick and I took a Baldy hike. It must have been 10 years ago, almost, when they were. I think they appeared with us for the first time, something like 2013, and Nick and I hiked up Baldy, and he said, "Why don't we like discuss some big things? Like, could we do some stuff like a residency?" And I said, "Absolutely." And one thing led to another, and maybe the possibility of collaborating with composers. And it just, well, in my head, it was just like, I think I know the two elements here. Kevin, whose work I'd already done, commissioned one of his symphonies in California, done the premiere of Hymn to the Sun, the commission here for the opening of the pavilion, as Derek referred to. I think there's a lot of stuff in the Venn diagram here of elements that I think would work well with you together. And so that's where it started.
Yeah, and then I saw you at Davies Hall in San Francisco, just backstage, and you
That's right.
mentioned it again, I think, and I was trying to think about it, and it was kind of a daunting idea, really. These incredible these three musicians who can just play anything, and you know them very well, right? They've played here a lot.
Oh, yeah.
They just exude joy, and there's this infectious energy. I don't think I should use the word infectious these days, but
In the best sense.
an energetic approach. But also, I mean, two violins and bass. What do you do with that? An orchestra. I was afraid of the two violins up here, and then this gulf of like space. I'm just talking about register. Like this is the bass clef. This is the top of the treble clef. I was like, how am I gonna? I like to, as you know, I like to work in a way where the harmonies are sort of filled out in a very traditional way, like the way that Brahms might have spaced harmony. I love that, and so it was hard for me to imagine what to do. And I heard them play at Joe's Pub in New York, a set, you know, like a show, you know, and they're like a rock group. I mean, you know them, and they, everything they were playing, all the arrangements and their own compositions, they all, I kept hearing all my favorite harmonies. Like that's what I would do. That's like, so I, afterwards, I saw Nick and I said, I don't know, I think maybe you guys should just write your own concerto. I mean, I just couldn't imagine what I would do, you know, that they couldn't do themselves because they're so facile. You know, they can just improvise something. I've been at the house of the Levens where I'm staying with, and Charles Yang and I were up last night just improvising together, piano and violin, and I think he had a ukulele at some point.
Wouldn't you like to have been a fly on the wall for that?
Yeah, come over tonight. Anyway, they're not the. Sometimes when I write music, I give the music to the performer, and they just try to play it really well, and I try. I say, well, do you think that this section could be a little longer? Do you think that this part should it be like an octave lower, and then go up at this point? And most of the time, there's, I don't know. They just sort of, they're used to accepting, you know, like this is Mahler, and so we play it, you know, this is how Mahler, you know, Bach did this. So when it comes to a living composer like me, they basically have the same approach. Time per Three, I mean, they're very respectful of what I did, but they understand the malleability of music, that it could be so many things. It can be an infinite number of things at every juncture in a piece of music. It could go this way, it could go that way, it could go up, it could go down, it could have the accompaniment of the orchestra, or the orchestra could be silent. Uh, it could be played pizzicato, it could be played arco, it could be played with string harmonics. And they understand that, and they're so attuned to the experience of live performance because they do it so often, you know? It's not something that they get nervous for, and here's the big thing that I practice for. They do it every day. They could do it right now. They could just, they wouldn't even know what they're going to play. Right. They would just start doing something, and one of the bass, Renan might start doing something, and okay, then they just come in and do, you know, they're so flexible. So that was intimidating, actually, because they're more facile than I am as someone who for whom music just sort of emerges. But I eventually got around to doing it because it was just too exciting not to. Am I still on? I feel like I'm not.
You just faded for a second.
Yeah, I'm like, maybe I just hold my, okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I don't know what to, anyway, can I be heard? Are you guys hearing me? Okay.
I think it's okay.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. Let's talk about the piece itself.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
So once we got this thing, is like, all right, we've got all of the elements together.
Yeah.
It's a co-commission.
Yeah.
San Francisco, Tampa, Philadelphia, all of these things
Yeah.
coming together. You're writing a piece for Time for Three. It's like, okay, Time for Three, orchestra, Kevin. What happened next?
Mm-hmm. The next thing I felt like I had to do, and this is contrary to what I just said about starting a piece of music, is that I really was so intimidated by just the concept of two violins and a bass. A lot of composers wouldn't be, you know, composers who are more, for whom like jazz is a bigger part of what they do. You know, they would think, oh, the bass can be doing this, the violins can be improvising. For some reason, I needed to figure out some phrases that they would play, you know, just some things they could do together. And so it was a real kind of sketchbook of things, and I've never done that before. I just went to the piano, and for a few days, started coming up with various things, a chorale. I had heard one of the songs they did in New York. It was a beautiful piece that sounded like a hymn, you know, almost like a five-voice chorale. And I wanted to do something like that. And so I started working out one of those, which appears as just by themselves in the third movement, which is just intact. And that's interesting because now that I think about it, that came first.
Uh-huh.
And then I thought, because it goes yum, ba-da-dum, ba-dee-da-da-dum. I'm not singing the harmony, I'm only one person. Dum, ba-da-dum. It's sort of lilting. They all do that in unison, these sort of rich harmonies with some kind of dissonance in a good way. So bum, ba-da-dum. So I thought, actually, if that's just a rhythm, then, and that's what you eventually you'll hear that in the context of this movement. What if the movement began that way, but in a totally different guise, with this, like, the orchestra playing this chord that's like whum, and then the woodwinds, dee-da-dum, orchestra or strings, whum, da-dee-dum, ba-dum, these kind of odd, kind of cold, stark harmonies in the winds, so that you eventually get to the warmth. You have to sort of, that has to be earned through in the course of that movement. It develops to the point where the group plays this rhythm that you heard at the very beginning, but in a much more inviting way. And so there's a good example of working backwards, which was very rare for me. But it was a necessity because I felt like I needed to just come up with some things they can do together. And there were others of those too in the piece.
And then to piggyback onto that, the very opening gesture of the piece is really quite remarkable. And I wanted to expand on what you said it's so important that the very first thing you hear is like, you need to have me at hello, right?
Yeah, it's like
and you do it beautifully here. Let's talk about the first thing that they'll hear.
Yeah, it's a should I
Do you want to give
it
the game
away?
I don't know, or not.
I mean, it's not like a big, newsworthy, like people are going to be, like, guess what? We just heard the first.
Yeah, right.
Call the New York Times.
Stop the press.
No, yeah. It's.
Breaking news.
But I remember coming up with it. I remember being at the dinner table and playing it for my son, who's my most honest critic, I would say. He was 10 at the time. He's 12 now. But it was something where, what we haven't mentioned, which you all know, is that the group can sing really well. They're beautiful singers. But Charles especially is a very confident singer. But they can sing in three-voice harmony really beautifully. And so I thought, I always do like to begin a piece with something, a very sort of clear rhetorical statement, which is just can lend itself to development and can do all kinds of different things because it's simple. And I thought at first I'd have them play this very simple chorale where they start on a single note, an E above middle C, and then opens up into a C major triad, which is like the simplest thing you could have in music, right? Just on the piano. And then one note moves, in a sort of chorale-like way that Bach would, is his chorale. Sometimes of the four voices, one note will move and the others stay the same as a sort of common tone between two chords. Other times, two notes will move. Rarely, all four notes will move. So it's the first thing you hear is sort of in that context, but I decided to have them sing it instead. So without any orchestral accompaniment. So they just come on the stage and they sing this a cappella chorale, falsetto, and and I really love how they do it. I feel like they sing it. It's exactly the way I wanted. And then what happens is the orchestra sort of takes what they did and they play it. So it's like a few bars long, right? 6 bars or something. And then the orchestra takes it over and they play it while then they pick up their instruments, the trio, and they sort of accompany this chorale. And then it gets bigger and bigger till the whole string section is playing this chorale as full and big as you can play. And then eventually the brass section. So the trajectory just of that from beginning, this little a cappella thing in three voices, very modest and kind of small and lonely, hanging in space, kind of imagine it actually as a call into space. Like if we sent it out, these movies like Contact, where there's a message sent from a foreign a distant sort of intelligent life form sent back to us, and we hear it as we've done with the Voyager, was it Voyager 2? Is that what it was
Think so,
called?
yeah.
That was sent out with various things like the Goldberg variations and various pieces of art. I was thinking, what if this were sent? What if this were received? This were sung into space and received, 4 million light years from now, and what would be understood about our DNA as Earth people?
But it has a kind of weightlessness about it. That's why
Yeah.
what you were talking about getting sent through space. It just seems to float in the air
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then turn in on itself, and then a little silence for contemplation, and then
and then
another one,
repeats.
and repeat. It's very elemental.
Well, that's how often music works. You do something once, you do something again, and the third time it's a little different. And I'm not sure that's something that the reason we do that, the reason that people have done that, or the composers have done that, all the way back to Handel, Vivaldi, even probably before that. I don't know. It's something about us, about humans, right?
Yeah,
I don't know
right.
what it is.
The rule of three or something.
Yeah, we hear it once. Oh, tell us again. Yes, but you know what? Actually, it's a little bit this way. There's something about the way we evolve or develop that feels natural. So yeah, I think we were all. I should just be honest that I feel like we wrote this piece. I wrote this piece, and we didn't really know what it was about. We called it Triple Concerto, kind of a boring title. It had 4 movements, and we started talking about it. We just got on these Zoom calls, the 4 of us, like, what is it really about, And we started thinking about that, the notion of reaching out and kind of encoding a message with our DNA, and we started thinking about. I started thinking the thing I was saying earlier, the beginning of the 3rd movement. I imagined, like, I think I said this in the program notes, like a space vessel which has been abandoned and just floating inert in the recesses of space. I don't know why I thought of that, but it's just like this hull of this dead ship just floating with its no longer inhabited or used. It's so cold and stark in the middle of space, and then eventually maybe we find it and revive it or something. But there are all these instances of human contact and the attempt at contact, which came up as we had this discussion, including the thing you hear at the beginning of the 4th movement, which is a Bulgarian folk tune that I heard at my son's cello recital. I keep talking about my son. He's a big part of this piece, I guess. But he's playing the cello very well these days, and his teacher had like 12 of her students playing this really complicated Bulgarian tune in unison at one of the recitals they had, and I thought, this is what we need to do for the 4th movement, something where bum 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 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, something where the rhythm was a little unpredictable and dance-like, because we hadn't had that in the piece yet.
Right.
Something I thought that's a perfect answer for the 4th movement. But then I thought, actually, maybe I'll just actually do that, just have that tune as a sort of a variation, do variations on that. And so that's where that came about. And again, we thought of a sort of cultural exchange, because it's not like I don't use my own voice when representing this Bulgarian tune that you'll hear. It's like it sort of has my sort of harmonic and like harmonic imprint as a composer on it. And it would be interesting if I wrote a tune and then, let's say, a Bulgarian composer or somebody from another country said, like, I want to show you how your tune sounds in my voice. I feel like that's a kind of attempt at contact as well, reaching across a cultural divide. And
because it's always been the case. I mean, cross-cultural pollination and composers learning from one another, and
yeah.
Don't you think that's
yeah,
just
and I thought of Bartok's. There's a beautiful piece by Bartok. Well, of course, he was actually Hungarian, but using well, actually the Romanian folk dances. But very much like his voice is in those pieces, which I found really interesting. And so anyway, contact just seemed like the thing to call the piece,
And how about this? We haven't talked about the 2nd movement yet, and the codes and pulses, because that's a how is it, like 5? It's over very quickly, but it's massively hyperactive.
It's
right?
super
it just
energetic.
goes like the wind, and it's got time for 3 really, in
Playing.
full full
full
on,
form.
no holds barred, take no prisoners mode. But
It's some things are just a reaction to what came before, and I thought that's what that movement needed. In fact, I imagined the first movement ending with that chorale that we talked about. They sing it as well as play it, and the orchestra accompanies it, and it's much darker, and there's a sense of kind of um uncertainty at the end of the first movement. But it ends with them singing again, sort of very, very, very quietly. They sing this tune again, but it means something different from the introduction of it at the beginning. And then for me, the answer to that was the way the second movement starts with these massive brass and timpani, boom, 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 and then the group is just like extremely virtuosic in response to that. But the whole movement has this underpinning of like sort of Beethovenian, just timpani and brass. And for me, it just was what I heard at the end of the second movement. So um, it just needed to happen, sorry, I mean, at the end of the
the
first
first
movement.
movement.
Yeah, the first movement, it's like essentially very lyrical and kind of, what would you say, expansive. It's,
Yeah, I mean,
rich and but not fast. And so a fast second movement was the thing to do. But
so the
then,
basic design is slow, fast, slow, fast.
yeah, well, if you want to write a three movement piece, then for a group like this, you pretty much have to end fast. They're not gonna. The time for three is not gonna say, yeah, let's just sort of,
Mellow out
yeah,
into the
just sort of taper off and
exit
just
stage
taper off,
left.
and anyway, that's it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
coming.
So yeah.
Good
So
night.
anyway, so yeah, it became. I had to do a four movement
had to.
piece because
Yeah.
I wrote myself into a corner with having the second movement be fast, and the
Yeah.
third movement needed to be, like you said, the second movement is just so fast, blindingly fast, and just like a blaze of energy. And then this third movement needed to have space in it, meaning air, meaning like silence. So these chords, and then nothing, just listening to the silence between the chords.
But there's a sinister element to that. I find that you've also, that has its own emotional weight that hasn't really been explored up until that point. I mean, there's a demonic energy of the second movement, but there's something more. You mentioned the spacecraft floating in space. There's something a little bit Kubrick-esque.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
Was that subconscious?
Or? A lot of film references. It's very much in my mind when I write music. I just love film. I'm a huge fan of it, and so.
Have you done much film
No, I've
music
never
yet?
done. No, this is the new frontier for me. I'm really hoping that I move into I've always wanted to do it, and I hear film scores, and I think, oh, I could do that. I think I could do that. But
Is anybody out there listening in movie
no,
land?
it's okay. It needs to happen organically. But,
Yeah, of course.
But thanks for being my agent.
Sure. No, my pleasure.
But I do love film, and sometimes I don't know if I'm reacting to a film score or film itself, just the way a film feels, and and I'm reacting to it in the narrative.
But I mean, that's part of your storytelling that makes you also such a great opera composer as well. It's just, and the one thing that we haven't really talked about, I've always been struck, two things in particular about your music, is it's the facility that you are able to embrace on the lyrical side of things, that which of course makes you such a natural for opera, but in your symphonic music as well, and chamber music, that was it Bernstein, I think, that said it's much harder to write a tune in F major than the most complex 12-tone serial Schoenbergian intellectual exercise. And you have this natural ability to sing through the instruments, and certainly now through voices with opera. And then your harmony. And there's just like, I don't know, I can, like, you're one of the composers that if you sat down and did a blind taste test, that I would, at a certain point, go, that's Kevin. And I would, it's because this is a signature way that you have of changing harmonies. And I feel like you're leading us, it's like, I call it like portal music, and I very much in the first 2 or 3 minutes of the first movement, I feel that it's like another portal is opened and we're in this new harmonic space, and it's just the right space to be in. Does that make sense? Because it's.
I really appreciate that. I sometimes don't feel like I have any How's
Oh,
that?
that's
Oh,
good.
good. Okay, here we go.
That's good.
Yeah, thank you for saying that because we can just share it. I tested negative this morning.
Thank you.
Um,
Me too.
uh, so because I sometimes feel like everything I'm doing has been heard before and et cetera, and really interesting that here at the age of 50, I feel like my voice is starting to stick or have something that's recognizable to great musicians like you and um, the notion of those portals is really interesting because what has been complicated and what's I think confusing for a lot of composers that they feel like they have to either do the like you said this 12 tone sort of number driven angular kind of music or write tonal music and I've never really thought of it in those terms. I've always thought of it as much more fluid and that there's not really such a thing as dissonance. It's just a matter of how many notes are in a chord or at any moment what are the notes that are allowed in the harmony. There could be like if you just take a vertical sort of, well, the bass plays a D and then the violas play a B flat and the bassoon plays this, and how many notes are there? Sometimes you need 4, sometimes you need 1, sometimes you maybe need 12. Like if things are really, you want a lot of density in the harmony. But as far as the way one moves from harmony to harmony, I've never thought of it in those terms. Like now I'm writing in one style, now I'm writing in another. It's very much, it's all kind of one thing. And I do believe that my favorite composers of so-called tonal music are able to shift harmonically, and that's what makes for me that's the most beautiful thing about music is the way harmony moves. And all the composers whose music I most love, it's the way that we move from chord to chord, and they don't really have to be heard as chords, but
tension and release.
yeah,
as
yeah,
well, right?
exactly, and not yeah, and holding on to the tension that the tension you feel, not even a bad kind of tension. It's just a matter of wanting to keep listening, not to let the air out of the balloon, and that is done through the way the music moves harmonically, in my opinion. So yeah.
Right. And it's encapsulated in the very opening gestures of the piece.
Yeah.
Which is,
And it's hard to discuss that because it's something we can't really talk about well. We could talk about melody really easily, and you could say, "Oh, I remember that melody from your piece. I like that melody in Mozart, in the beginning of, the Marriage of Figaro, or the melody in Beethoven's, in certain pieces of Beethoven. But let's say the Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. What's the melody there? How interesting is the melody? Bum bum bum. Is that the melody? Bum bum bum. And it's really about harmony. And so for me, that's the most important thing.
or the Seventh Symphony, that great tune, bum 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 bum
Yeah.
bum bum bum
Right.
bum, but catchy, bum 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 bum.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah.
Bum, bum,
Yeah.
bum.
Yeah.
So I've been practicing that all morning.
Yeah, and then some melody creeps in, but
Right.
really he was beginning with harmonies, and it's totally compelling. And so actually I used to think that's all that mattered. And these days, as I think you'll hear in Contact, I am thinking much more about melody, about the shape of a line, so that, because the harmony is much more natural for me now. I sort of do what I do, I have my ways of, I don't have to think about it as much. And so I can think much more about melody and what can be, what makes a good melody, what's a melody that could be remembered or I would want to hear again, so.
Yeah.
But I had to figure out harmony first. Yeah.
And that's such a, or am I? I think I'm okay. You're, my mic's okay. Yeah, yeah. And ever since, the what we say the breaking point, the crisis that really, it was a crisis at the time of the collapse of tonality at the end of the late Romantic era with late Mahler and then Schoenberg introducing atonality. I think that's something, that's the elephant in the room for now 100 years plus of how do we deal with, chromaticism, dissonance versus consonance, tension and release.
Yeah.
And
I just think all music is interesting. I mean, almost everything is interesting, and I don't really reject any of it, So there's a way that I feel like I can work best and feels most, like me and most sort of genuine, just from who I am as a person. But I'm always listening to other things that are nothing like what I'm doing, and I'm fascinated by it. And I feel like it does actually creep in, even in the way I think of harmony or texture or, um, lots of things. I think the second movement of the piece actually there's a movement of music called spectralism, which is all about the harmonic series and color, and I think that actually is kind of in the second movement in some places. So but nobody would say I'm a spectralist. Like they'll be, oh my God, no, they're like a total heart on your sleeve romantic American.
Yeah.
That's who they think of.
Yeah. We should say that if you want to do a little bit of extra homework behind the scenes tomorrow, you can hear Contact because it has been recorded with the Philadelphia Orchestra and Time for Three. It's issued on Deutsche Grammophon, and you have the chance to check it out
Go to Apple
beforehand.
Music and yeah.
But in the meantime, why don't we throw open the hall for some questions, and I can. Jenny's going to pass around a mic, and I'll relay them to our online audience. Yes. Hang on a second. Let's speak into the mic so that we can all hear.
You said that your 12-year-old critic, I think it was at the dining room table, heard the first part of the third movement. What did he have to say?
He gave it a thumbs up. No, but I mean, there are other things that I will play. It's interesting to be a composer these days because I can write a piece of music and the computer can play it back, pretty well. I mean, it's not great, but it's pretty good. And so I will sometimes in the car, I'll have the MP3 of whatever I'm working on. I'll just play it for my son. I'm like, what do you think about this part? I'm like, what's the problem? Well, it just doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. Things like that. Or, I mean, interesting. Or this part goes on a little long, and he's almost never wrong. Like there's always, it's almost like, yeah, I kind of felt like I had to repeat the whole structure, and maybe I don't actually. I was thinking I wanted to be really clear, but maybe we got it. I can move ahead. So I learned things. But it was just that first thing you'll hear in the piece, them singing, and I think he just liked the harmony. I think we have a similar sort of similar affinity for chords and harmonies. So I guess it was not surprising. But I feel like maybe it's because I'm always raving about certain composers' pieces, and I'm like, oh, you have to hear this, and he's reacting to that. I'm wondering if it's honest. Like if he goes to college, and he'll probably come back and it'll be all Schoenberg or something. Like I don't know. Once he gets away from me, maybe. We'll see.
More questions. Yeah.
You mentioned that something has changed in the last 20 years that either changes your approach to music that has to do with the audience or something to do with now you focus on melody. What has changed in 20 years?
Well, I think that composers feel a lot of pressure from their colleagues and from the world of new music. There's a kind of insular little community, especially if you teach someplace. That can sometimes, you want to think about your colleagues' reaction to your music, and you think of critics' reaction sometimes too, which can be really dangerous. And over time, I just have stopped caring. I think that's about really how it comes down to. I just kind of like think about, oh, and you know what it is? I started listening to older pieces of mine, like 15 years old, 20 years old, something like that, and just thinking, how do I like this or not? And I think, no, I don't. And why did I do that? Why did I like this part okay, but why did I do this whole thing? Well, what was I trying to prove? And I think that it could be that the stuff I'm writing now in 20 years I'll feel the same way, but I just feel now I'm thinking of like, well, what do I really actually want to listen to? As of not, I don't know what all of you want to listen to. It's going to be something different for everyone. All I can know is what I want to hear. If I play, it's not like I listen to my music all the time, but if I do have to, and I push play, do I feel, is it compelling? And I really try only to think about that these days. But it's taken a long time to get to the point where I can, I feel like I used to think I could do that, but I don't think I was entirely. I think I was letting other voices sort of filter in or just they were in the background someplace. And of course, I've also just learned about what's most effective in writing for orchestras, singers. I'm still learning that. I think my new opera is a huge improvement on the first one, the second one. I've learned what works well, yeah, for solo instruments. Yeah, what can be done, what is can be done in a small rehearsal period. Just a few rehearsals. Um, Even if there's not a lot of rehearsal, what will still sound good. There's just a lot of things that it takes experience to, you know, figure out.
So basically, you're saying it's good to get older.
I feel good. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah.
me too. Me too.
Yeah, like I feel much better than I did writing music, when I was 31 or something. Yeah.
Gabriella came up with a wonderful quote, which I left in my book over there, but it had to do with her creative academy music and the difference that she feels with the younger colleagues that she's mentoring and starting at the beginning of their career is like the biggest difference is simply of experience, not of talent or vision. She says that essentially that's if anything that sets her apart from her younger colleagues, it's not that she's more per se more talented or more visionary. It's that she's learned through experience and trial and error. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. I don't know if that makes sense to me. It certainly resonated with me.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I'm really saying, that I've learned from experiences and where some things have worked well and other things haven't, and often composers we think we need to be complex, it's just part of, I don't know what it is. I'm sure writers feel the same way. And often the more complex you are, let's say the more layers you add to any moment in a piece of music, then it all just sort of sounds like one thing. So it's actually not complex. It's actually very simple. The most complexity, actually, go back to this piece, the 40th Symphony by Mozart. I don't have perfect pitch. Do you have a
G is a G if you're looking for G minor.
G? Okay.
There you go.
Anyway, there's a part in the development section of that piece, where he has the basses playing.
Yeah.
So there are like two things going on. Are there two or three?
Right.
There's maybe three. Yeah.
And
So the upper
switches.
strings are doing it, and then the lower strings are doing it, and they keep alternating. And they're sort of in imitation with each other. And then you have the winds doing their own thing. I remember listening to that when I was 8 or so, not 10 maybe, on with headphones on, and thinking I was just absolutely astounded by it. I was like, it was like in 3 dimensions, listening with my headphones. I was like, I could actually see these lines, this line coming up in space, and then above it, this line coming down through that other line, and then these other woodwind lines, or they're sort of more static. It was a visual experience almost. And if you look at the score, there's very little going. There's very little there. It's the complexity. It's complex enough. It's so almost so simple that it can feel complex when we hear it. And if he had just done all kinds of other things, like he had decided to have another melody going on, probably the whole thing would have just sounded like one big texture. And I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I found that sometimes the most simple things, in terms of the construction of them and the way they're conceived, as a listener, can feel the most complex and layered,
Yeah.
oddly. But that's taken a lot of. It's counterintuitive, though. Because when you want something to you want moments in music that are complex or that feel they're developed and they challenge the audience, so that the more simple moments can feel even more simple. But you don't have to go as far as you think you do sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Less is more.
Could you just describe how the collaboration works between the composer and the librettist when you're composing an opera?
That's a great question. And it is in fact, my librettist and I are, for the hours, are already thinking about our next thing. And he's been texting me. And he's like basically already figured out the first act. Like, this will happen, and then this will happen, and then at the end of the first act, this will happen, and then blackout. And I was like, okay. I mean, for me, it's a little premature, but he's excited about it. And so it's in the best circumstances, it's a back and forth. the libretto really has to be written first, because that's the structure of the whole thing. The narrative structure has to be in place. But along the way, I could say, I really think there needs to be more of a musical moment here. Can you give me some more text here? Could this be could this be a bigger moment? Or I feel like there's too much going on here. Can we not have this character in the scene? Or I want to do a big orchestral moment with no singing here. So is there a way we can lead to that with what you're doing? And so there's just a ton of, and these days, a lot of texting back and forth. Like as I'm composing, I'm texting, and he's already done, his work, but it's always changing as the music gets written. So, for me, it's that the libretto has got to be there first. I actually, as a composer, I like to react to a libretto. It's almost like a film composer, really, saying, here's the film, now what can you do to it? And going away and dreaming up all these themes. You can watch films of John Williams and Steven Spielberg working together when on the piano, when Williams first came up with some themes, he's like, well, I'm thinking that when the ship comes down, E.T.'s ship, it's going to be this, and plays it, and it's fascinating. And so that, but I think for him to be inspired as a composer, he needs that in place. He's not going to just come up with themes about aliens, So for me, I really do need the structure in place to be excited about, okay, the first thing that happens is this. And then it's always about also the second thing, So how am I going to lead from this to that? Because that's really compelling when music goes from one thing to another. I'm going too far ahead here. I think your question was probably simpler than all I'm going into here, but we work together a lot. It's a very close, and you have to have trust, and I think you both have to be the understanding that you both want it to you want it to be good. And so if he's limiting what I'm doing or she's limiting what I'm doing, and vice versa, it's not going to work. So you have to be very open, very, very advanced in your social interaction, and you're sharing with others and all that. You've got to be really open and really listen, and so it requires I think most teams that stay together and really do a lot of pieces together, it's easy. They work well together.
I have maybe one more question, and here we go.
Oh, I'm coming with the microphone.
Sorry.
There you go.
Would you please tell us about the rehearsal? Is there going to be a rehearsal somewhere this afternoon before the
There is.
concert?
There is.
Oh.
So we are going to be working. The orchestra is rehearsing from 4 till 6:30 at the Pavilion today. The first hour or so will be on Gabrielle and Frank's piece, which Samir Patel will conduct, and then I'll be there for the second half rehearsal with Kevin in time for 3, and then tomorrow's rehearsal I think is from 1 to 3:30. These are all open rehearsals. Yes, you're more than welcome to come and take a listen to the creative process as we undergo this exciting experience over the next 24, 48 hours, which is a good sort of segue into lunch. And with it, my thanks for being with us this morning, Kevin, and to give us a fascinating look under the hood of what it is to be a creative artist. Let's give it up for Kevin Putz.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Take care.